Sarah's Reflections by Andrea Cubis. This painting was an awesome challenge for me. It's the largest canvas I've ever painted on, and I really enjoyed that challenge. I got a commission, and it was based off of a smaller picture that I had painted on a 16 by 20. And we worked together off of that 16 by 20 to discuss different colors, some changes she wanted for this commissioned piece. And part of it is what I'm working on right in this part, is the sky and the lake. She really didn't want a bright blue sky because she didn't have a lot of bright blue in that room. So I went with a very pale sky and lake. The lake is a smidge of a shade darker. I think at the end you don't really see it, but I'm hoping the effect that there's water in the lake versus in the sky comes out. Now with all these dots that you see me painting, this is the background, and this is simply setting the scene of the pattern of the reflection. I did mix in with the gesso the different colors so that I'd get a sense of which side the light was hitting on these islands and which side the shadow was being cast. I did find, and I was glad I figured this out in the undercoat here, is that I was having a hard time doing the same shape brush stroke on the top as I did in the reflection, because it needed to be an exact opposite. So by doing this first, I learned that I really need to flip the canvas, and you're going to see that later in this video that I am flipping that canvas quite a bit. Originally at this stage I was trying really hard to avoid flipping the canvas just because of its sheer size, but by that point I had realized that I really needed to flip the canvas if I wanted my trees on these islands to look the same. Now the name Sarah's Reflections obviously is for my friend in honor of her, but it's also a representation of who my friend is. Sarah is this wonderful person who casts such kindness to those people around her, that so much so that the people who get to know her just want to reflect back that kindness. And I know that there's still people in her life that probably don't reflect it back, but she has this way, for me at least, to want to be a better person. And she doesn't do it by pushing anything on you. She just always has the kindness that you would hope in a person, and she's got it just naturally. And I really do feel that the people that I met when I was around Sarah also reflected that back better when she was around them. So the reflections in this painting, the reflections coming off of those islands, really to me is like Sarah. Even though the reflection coming off of Sarah may not look identical to what Sarah's doing, I do believe that her goodness is being reflected back out into the world, just as the reflection in these lakes are. And I do also, I mean, it's more than one reflection, and not just in the painting. You have 3 islands here. All 3 are being reflected, so there's more than one reflection. But same thing with Sarah. She has many things that she reflects out into the world, and those things, I think, benefit the world, and the world around her and near her are better for knowing her because of those reflections that she is able to create. For those of you who know Sarah, you know that she works in a very difficult job, working with students that can sometimes be tough to handle, and she does it with such grace and such kindness and such patience. And through my watching her, I really felt that I learned a lot about being patient and kind to people who maybe I might have been a little less patient with normally. As you can see, I did change my style in the islands in how I was painting them. This undercoat again was mainly just so that I'd get the pattern, but that last island, it was like, yes, I finally got the brush strokes the way I wanted, hence the flipping of the painting. Now I'm starting to go in with the top coat. I actually have two palettes running at the same time. I use the lids of Tupperwares so that I could close them up and put them in the fridge and preserve the paint from each session, because quite honestly, because of the size of this painting, it was hard to do a whole section of color in one go. So by preserving it in the fridge in these Tupperwares, I was able to keep the paint, which made it so I didn't waste as much paint. So what I did is the side of the island that is in the light, that was one palette, and I had my lightest color, my middle colors, and my medium green color on that palette. And then on my other palette, I had that medium color again, so it actually crossed in both places, but it was now for the dark side, my medium color was now the lightest color, and then I went into two darker colors after that to create some variety in the shadows. And I had both open with two separate paintbrushes, and I just went back and forth between the two palettes. Now within those palettes, I did not wipe off my brush very often, so that I would get blendings of the different colors on those palettes, because each tree would be a blend of those colors, whether it be because their leaves were changing, because some of those trees are that beautiful yellow, that's the Indian yellow coming out, or some of them were still quite green with just a shadow, a hint of light coming onto them. Now, when I flipped it and I did the reflection, I followed that undercoat that you see there to get a sense of the pattern of where my colors needed to be, and that way I knew maybe I wouldn't match exactly to the top, but I would be in the right area, and for the most part I figured it would look like a perfect reflection. As I moved along, I did fix certain things that I felt were happening. I gave the island more of a curve so it would feel more round, and you can kind of see that as my line drifted a little there. But I was still following the pattern, filling in the blanks so there was no white shining through. And you'll also see there is a change in the sheen between the undercoat and the top coat. The top coat had quite a nice glossy feel to it, whereas the undercoat was quite matted and looked very two-dimensional. I did use painter's tape to do my initial line, and then when I came down, I actually connected the reflection and the actual eyelid together. Oh, excuse me. And then I came back in again once it was dry and used painter's tape to create the waterline. Now, what was nice about having those two separate palettes, when I now started to come to the bigger islands, I now just had to work with one of the two palettes. So obviously for this one, I grabbed the lighter colors palette and worked my way through, starting at the top and coming on down. I had my painter's tape there, so I knew where to stop. And that helped create that nice variety of trees, and yet still kept it nice and bright. You knew this was a sunny side of the island by having that the separate palette I found, at least. And as you can see, I had to go back to that middle island because I felt like it wasn't as round as I wanted, and just adding in a couple extra trees, it got all fixed. So thank goodness for that. I did flip the canvas more at this point, just so that I could get those brush strokes more consistent, and the reflection would be more accurate to what I was doing. At this point, this sounds really sad, my arm was getting tired, and that's why you're seeing more breaks from one spot to the next. I wanted to get down to that water line, but boy, that arm was getting sore. It doesn't look like a lot of exercise, but when you're used to working on smaller pieces and suddenly get to do a really big one like this, it's one of those considerations I didn't even think would be an issue. And in the end, I mean, it was good for me. A little extra exercise would never do me harm. As you can see, now I've switched over to the shadowy island. Where there is light, there must be darkness, and that's what's beautiful about this painting, is it balances the light and the dark. You have the middle island that has both, and then the two bigger islands closer are opposites of each other, which emphasizes that need of lightness and darkness. And that truly comes through something that I have learned through Sarah, that even when you're in dark times, or when you meet someone who feels like they're full of darkness, that if you search enough and you give them the time, you will find out that there is light, and that they have a beauty that they bring to the world that I might have otherwise completely missed. So because of my friendship with Sarah, I have seen sides of people that I don't think I would have seen otherwise. Now at the bottom of the painting, I'm starting to put in the rocks. This kind of anchors the painting. It also lets you know which way's up and which way's down. These rocks gave me a little issue, and it's mainly because I had to paint the bottom. I wasn't sure if my friend was going to be framing this in the end or not, and I promised her that I would paint this so that it wouldn't matter. If she wanted to frame it, great. If she didn't, the edges would be completed. Well, that meant I had to get under that bottom edge and paint those rocks in. So once I had the rocks, I again flipped the painting, and I drew in the beginning stage of the birch trees, and I found it easier to pull from the top and come down, and that's why I did that. And I used that big brush, and I went up and down trying to get those to be a nice good white. I had one tree go off on an angle because, as Sarah can attest to, there's always one that has to go in a different direction. And she'd probably tell you that usually that one is me, but that's okay. Even though it's going in a different direction, it still is beautiful. And now I'm kind of going through, and I'm going up and down. I go up and down those trees many times with that brush, and it's hard to tell in the video here, but what I'm doing is I'm adding shadow and I'm adding light. So obviously the light is going on the left side of the trees, and the shadow is going on the right side, just like the islands. To create the shadow, I added a little blue to the white, and to create the light, I added yellow ochre. And that gave it kind of that nice warm sunlight hitting those white birch trees. As I went through, I started to do just kind of the finer edge of things to try and straighten things out, to smooth them out, get it so that they felt more rounded. And then the next step is, of course, to put in all those awesome black lines that you see on birch trees that make them distinctive. And I started off with lots of spacing in between because it's always easier to add than to take away. And I worked my way up, and I'll be honest, there's parts of this video that are missing because I would go up on a stepping stool to get to the top, and unfortunately, just because of the angle of the camera, you really couldn't see what I was painting past my body. Sometimes when you get kind of in the crux of painting, you forget that there's a camera behind you trying to capture what you're doing. You'll note I had a guest appearance. My son snuck out of bed, wanted to see what I was doing. Not his first time. Sure, it's not going to be his last. I went back and I added more black lines on those birch trees, and then I also went back and I went over the rocks and I made them darker. It took me a couple goes to get the right blend for the rocks so that I would be happy with how it blended in with the rest of the painting. And as you can see, this is me balancing the canvas up on its edge so I could paint the rocks and paint under on that edge to get the canvas so you don't need to frame it. Different artists will do different things for the edge. Some will just paint them like a black, but I wanted to have the painting continue right off the edge. This is those final touches, adding a little sunlight to those rocks, again showing that the light is coming from the left and that things stay consistent. And this is me signing it off with those beautiful acrylic pens. Sarah's Reflection by Andrea Cubis. Thank you so much to Sarah for trusting me with this awesome project, and thank you for watching.